All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, or at least this afternoon here. So thank you for joining us. So this is one of our first Friday events. So Sandy, you might go to the next slide. So I'll start with a reminder of some of our practices in this and the sponsorship of this. So this is brought to you by the Extension Committee on Organizational Policy, ECOP, as those of us who've been in this realm for a while recognize it. So we historically have alternated our first Friday meetings with updates from the ECOP chair and others, together with something that's brought to us by the Professional Development Committee. And this afternoon is one in which professional development is the primary focus. And it's for all of us who are part of the system. All right, next slide. So you'll have an opportunity to we expect that we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end, so you can raise your hand or use the comment features to ask questions. We'll have a feedback survey at the conclusion of today's session. So again, appreciate your feedback on that. So I know this is probably a reminder for most of you, but we also want to welcome any new people and make sure that they are aware of the operations. So, all right, next slide. So one of the things that we wanted to do today was just to honor for a moment our friend Ivory. So those of you who've been in Extension Administration for a while will recognize the many contributions that he's made. He made to extensions. So particularly with respect to ECOP, he served as a voting member from 2006 to 2009 when he was at the University of Arkansas, and 2019 to 2024 while he was at Nevada, Reno, and then Oregon State. So he served on the program committee. He was co-chair of ECOP's 4-H Youth Development Task Force for a couple of years. He also served on the Extension Foundation Finance Committee. So watch in the Monday Minute should you want to make a contribution to a scholarship endowment in Ivory and his wife's name. You'll have an opportunity to do that. But again, just wanted to briefly remember and honor our friend Ivory. All right, next slide. So again, today's opportunity is brought to us by our ECOP Professional Development Committee. So Carl took on the role of chair in March. We appreciate his service in that. Ken LaValle had taken on that role prior to that time, and with his transition to a new role at University of New Hampshire, he has to hand that off, and we're grateful to Carl for stepping up to take that lead. So I'll turn it over to him because he's going to moderate our session today.
Thanks, Damona, and welcome everyone. This is a really important topic for all of us. So if you have questions that come to you that you would like me to ask our guests today, you can put those in the chat as well. And I can ask those questions either during or ideally at the end, but there may be things that come up during the conversation. Our presenter today is Dr. Elizabeth Stulberg. She advises clients in the areas of food, agriculture, and life sciences. Elizabeth has worked in Congress, the White House, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and holds degrees in biology and German studies from Brown University, and a PhD in molecular, cellular, and developmental biology from Yale University. Elizabeth uses her deep subject matter expertise and broad experience working within the federal landscape to advocate for science, leverage federal programs, and enhance clients' scientific and technological endeavors. Recently, Elizabeth used her expertise and experience in USDA and Congress to facilitate a $10 million funding for infrastructure for APLU. So with that, I want to welcome Elizabeth. I don't think it was in her intro, actually, but Elizabeth works for Lewis-Burke Associates and for APLU as one of our advocacy arms in Washington, D.C. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you so much, Carl, for the kind introduction. And I am going to share my screen. So give me 1 second to press all of these buttons. All right, can you all see it? Great. All right. Well, yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Stulberg. I work for Lewis-Burke Associates. We work with APLU's Board on Ag Assembly, so like Doug Steele. And today we're going to be talking about federal government, how it works, how it doesn't work, and some stuff about advocacy too. So as Carl was saying, if you have questions, I can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen, but Carl, feel free. I have throughout this, because an hour is a long time. I have like slides built in that say, are there any questions before we move on? So feel free to put them in the chat, as you come up with them, and when we get to those slides, or raise your hand or whatever it is that you need to do, that you feel like doing, and we can address questions as we go if you prefer. All right, so see if this works. Okay, here we are. So what is Lewis-Burke? We're a government relations firm. Most of our clients are universities or scientific societies or research institutes, for example. There are about 40 of us here in our office in Washington, D.C. Each of us has slightly different backgrounds or areas of expertise. We have more than 50 clients, and like I said, most of them are universities, independent research institutions, or nonprofits. And you see there are 6 of us on this slide. I'm the one on the top right in the blue jacket, and then Bridget, and then Bruno, Christina, Dominique, and Hannah Marie. Many of you probably interact with Christina the most. Even though there are only 6 of us on this team, the way that Lewis-Burke is structured is that any of us can be called into any team at any time for any reason. So if there's some question you have or some agency that you want to look into that has nothing to do with anything that the 6 of us work on, we can bring in other people. And we began working with APLU's BAA in January 2022. So a little over, what is it, a year, 2 years, 2.5 years ago, something like that. So, okay, government relations. What is government relations? Because this is kind of a weird concept. Like, what do we do? What do we do as we sit here in Washington, D.C.? I like to use this metaphor that government relations is like a bridge. And I really love this metaphor because like a bridge goes both ways. So not only do we bring to you all through BAA, we bring stuff that's happening in the government, funding opportunities you might not be aware of, information about the Farm Bill, about appropriations, and all of those things. But we also bring you all to the government. We also, through, for example, CARET or facilitated trips, we make sure that your voices are heard at the federal level. And this is important because the federal policymakers, both in Congress and in the agencies, they want to hear from the people, the boots on the ground doing the work. What's working, what's not working. That feedback needs to go both ways. So that's especially why I like this image of a bridge. And what do? We help our clients take advantage of opportunities. So very specifically, we connect with legislative and agency staff. We get to know them. We find out what they're working on, where they see their agency going, or where they see this bill going. We try to discover or influence emerging themes that we see. So if a federal, someone at National Science Foundation wants to move more in one direction, we bring that to our clients and say, hey, does this work for you? Does it need to be adjusted, course corrected, even before something is announced? And then we also develop and pursue strategic priorities. But how do we know what themes or topics are priorities for you? So we need to get to know you and your priorities. So it's really helpful for you to know what we do and how we work, just as it's really helpful for us to know, what you do and how you work, because that mutual understanding really facilitates the most productive conversations. And that's why I'm here today. So today's presentation includes authorizations, which is to say, what does that mean? What the government is allowed to fund, in theory. Also appropriations. How much money do agencies actually get to spend? And these two things, they're often conflated, but I'm going to try to kind of break it down and disaggregate what these two things mean. I'm also going to have a slide or two on DC state of play. What is happening right now in government? And then advocacy. what you can do, how best to craft a memorable message when you do someday, or maybe in the past, you've already done this, come to Washington, D.C. to talk about what you do. All right, so authorizations, what the government is allowed to fund in theory. All right, going back to basics. Outside of what is outlined in the Constitution, the federal government is only allowed to do the things that Congress has given it permission to do by law, these authorized tasks. So, for example, the post office delivers the mail. They're allowed to do that. The Pentagon can purchase jet fighters and fly around in them. The IRS can collect, your employment information and then collect your money for your taxes. They are only allowed to do these things because Congress has passed laws giving the government the authority to do that. Now, if there were a question on your 1040 tax return on what your blood pressure is, you might have a problem with that. You might say, wait a minute, IRS, you're not allowed to do that. I don't need to tell you that. There's no law that says you're allowed to do that. So what could you do about this? Well, you could, there are three branches of government, right? If the federal government, the federal agencies are collecting this information illegally, well, you could go to the court system, the judicial branch, and sue them and say, you're not allowed to do this. So, you could bring this to court and the court would say, yeah, there's no law that says you're allowed to do this, IRS, you have to stop. You could also go to the legislative branch. You could go to Congress. Congress not only passes laws, it also has oversight over these federal agencies. And Congress could then call up the Postmaster General and have a hearing and say, what do you think you're doing? You have to stop that right now, or we're going to take away your funding, which can be very effective. Now, here's the thing. No one in these agencies actually wants to get sued. They don't want to be called up to Capitol Hill and get grilled by, Congress people. So they really do try to stick to doing only what they are authorized to do in law. Okay, so what do these laws look like? Federal laws give agencies the authority to act. So here's an example. This is not actually a law per se. It's in the federal code. The federal code is like the final version, the final draft of what all the laws together mean. So if you have something in the code that says something and then a law comes along, the law often says something like, all right, strike out, this date and put in this one, or adjust this paragraph to, edit this out, delete that, and put in this stuff instead. So the federal code is like a track changes version of all the laws that we have. So if you go to the federal code, and there it is CFR for the code of the Federal Register, and the 7 is everything to do with agriculture, just FYI. This is what you might find under NIFA's authorization. So what it says is the act, so this is the law that passed, designates the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, the WHO, as the lead federal agency for agriculture research, extension, and teaching in the food and agricultural sciences. Section blah, blah, blah authorizes the Secretary of Agriculture, who has delegated the authority to the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, or NIFA, to make competitive grants to land-grant colleges and universities having significant minority enrollments, and blah, blah, blah. So in other words, this is saying that the USDA in general and NIFA in particular have the authority, right? There's all about the authorities to do what? To make competitive grants. That's what this law says. It spells out exactly what this agency is allowed to do. It can make grants. Now, you'll notice that there's no number, there's no money involved in this. It's just the authority. You'll also notice that it doesn't have any kind of expiration date. Some laws have expiration dates, and some laws don't. If this one did have an expiration date, it would probably look like this. It would say, like, for each of fiscal years 2014 through 2023. It doesn't have this, which means that unless Congress passes a law saying that NIFA no longer has this authority, NIFA will continue to have this authority. Even if it never gets any money, I mean, if it doesn't get any money, it can't do it. But if it does, even a little bit, it can do this. So what is the deal with the expiration dates? Well, it didn't always used to be this way. So expiration dates force what are called reauthorizations. And they were added in the mid-20th century by Congress to push themselves to reassess programs before reauthorizing them. So you had a law, and it would just stay on the books forever, and Congress would never, they kind of procrastinate. They would never get around to taking another look at that law and seeing, well, is this out of date? Do we need to update this? And this kind of taking another look at these authorizations is called oversight. So congressional oversight means that they call witnesses, they hold hearings, they talk to the agencies that they've given these authorities to and ask them, like, how's it going? What more do you need? What are the problems? Should we just keep doing exactly what we're doing? And having this oversight process, holding hearings, calling witnesses, this can often lead to updated programs and new funding allocations. When you have a permanent authorization, like the one that NIFA has, it does not necessarily force that oversight. And so you just have something that stays the same forever. All right, so today's authorizations, as I said, often expire, but they expire in different timelines. So something like the National Defense Authorization Act, this is an act that happens every single year because it has a 1-year authorization. The Department of Defense is only authorized to work for 1 year. And then they're not authorized anymore. So technically what they do is kind of outside of congressional scope. But it's never happened that Congress has never failed to pass a reauthorization in this year. So it seems really quick, right? Like we were in a farm bill process that happens every 5 years, and then it's like this huge, big, long process. Well, 1 year, can you imagine doing it every single year? And yet the DoD actually prefers this because they want Congress aware of everything that they're doing. They don't want to get ahead of their skis and do stuff and then have Congress say, wait, we didn't want you to do that. DoD is highly reactive to the geopolitical environment, and they need Congress to be like all in. So they have a 1-year authorization, and that's good for them. But most agencies have 5-year authorizations, just like USDA. So the Farm Bill is one. There's also a 5-year one on education, on energy, which is to say nuclear policy. 5-year reauthorizations are an acknowledgement that updates are needed, but not every year. There are also agencies that are called like ongoing, sometimes called unauthorized. These are the ones that don't have expiration dates. NIFA is one of them. And in fact, most science and research agencies like the NIH don't have an expiration date. So the 21st Century Cures Act was the last time that NIH received any kind of reauthorization. That was more than 10 years ago. So other ones are like FBI, state, Federal Trade Commission, the Weather Service. And then there are some agencies that, their expiration is expired, but they sort of keep doing what they're doing, like the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, like the IRS. These are agencies that Congress doesn't actually want to touch because it takes too much political will to even talk about them. So unless there's like a major need, they're just not even going to touch it. All right, so that's all about authorizations. Carl, any questions so far?
No, I don't think we've had any. I'm guessing we'll have some specifics around the Farm Bill when we get into the current status. I think there'll be questions around that. Okay.
All right. So moving on to appropriations. This is how much money agencies get to spend. So, okay. Appropriators are the people in Congress who decide which programs get funded. All right. So here we have, say, the Agriculture Committee, and the chair of the Agriculture Committee is Glenn or G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania. He writes up the Farm Bill, and the Farm Bill says, there needs to be $700 million for AFRI. All right, so that's nice. That authorizes AFRI at $700 million. Well, what happens next? Well, now there's an Appropriations Committee. The subcommittee of appropriations in charge of agriculture funding, its chairman is a man named Andy Harris from Maryland. He writes the appropriations bills, at least on the House side, his counterpart in the Senate. And those bills say actually how much money AFRI gets. Well, AFRI's never gotten $700 million. Like, why is that, right? Well, okay, So things, I should start by saying things are a little bit complicated here. There is an agriculture authorization committee and there's an agriculture appropriations subcommittee. Those seem like pretty like hand in glove, like G.T. Thompson and Andy Harris, they should be working together, right? Interestingly, there are 12 subcommittees of this appropriations committee. So I mentioned agriculture, that one's headed by Andy Harris, but there are a lot of other ones and they don't always overlap. So for example, the Farm Bill covers a lot of stuff that has to do with the forestry, and the Forest Service is in USDA. But the Forest Service appropriations actually comes from that top right subcommittee, the Interior Environment and related agencies. So there is some overlap, but it's not 100%, okay? All right, so just wanted to put that out there. All right, let's go back to the fact that appropriators do not actually have infinite funds to put towards all of these programs, even if they wanted to. So, okay, the Farm Bill authorizes AFRI at $700 million. Great. Ag-Approps, including Andy Harris, has always been very supportive of agriculture research of all kinds. In fact, nobody's against agriculture research, but AFRI has never gotten this much. Why? Well, the reason is that Andy Harris has to deal with a total top-line funding cap number. And it's the budget committee that sets this cap on total funding. So you got Jody Arrington in Texas. He is the Republican chair of the budget committee, and he's in charge of passing what's called a budget resolution. This isn't even a law. It doesn't have any like authority at all. It's just kind of a general like handshake agreement among all the members of Congress of a top line total amount of money that Congress is willing to spend on the federal government this year. And that top line total number is called the 302A. I know I'm getting into the weeds with you on this, like bear with me here. Next, that 302A has to get divvied up among all of those 12 subcommittees. So Tom Cole is the appropriations chair. He takes that 302A and he divvies it up and gives one chunk of it called this 302B to Andy Harris. And that's the number that Andy Harris gets. That's what he has to work with. That's why he can't just give all the money that's authorized that he might want to. Now you might be asking yourselves, why is this process so convoluted? Why do you need, a House and Senate Agriculture Committee, a House and Senate Agriculture Appropriations Subcommittee, and a Budget Committee, and the Appropriations Chair? Why so many people? Well, yes, this is convoluted, but the upside is that there's so many opportunities for engagement. If you happen to live in, let's say authorizations and appropriations were all the same, or, then G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania was in charge of everything, well, Pennsylvania would get a whole lot of money and nobody else would get that much. If Andy Harris were in charge, Maryland would get all the spoils, and already they do, right? They already get, the chairs already get a little bit more, but right now everybody has to weigh in. And so there's just more opportunity for you to live in a place that has a say. And so that's, it's a good thing. There are more opportunities for engagement. All right, so let's say you want to engage with your legislature or with, with your legislator or with, your agency that NIFA or whoever it is. Timing is really important on this. When you go and talk to people is actually just as important as who you talk to and what you're talking about. So, okay, this is kind of a timeline mock-up of, the beginning of fiscal year 2023 through the end of fiscal year 2025. Our fiscal year, the one that we're in right now in 2024, it ends right there at the end of September of this year. Appropriators in each of these 12 subcommittees, including Mr. Andy Harris, they need to pass all of their fiscal year 2025 budgets by September 30th of this year. If they don't manage to do that, then they either have to pass a continuing resolution, which is a bill that says, okay, we're just going to keep the money at the exact same rate as it was last year, or the government shuts down, which I know many of you are familiar with. It's not fun. So planning for that 2025 budget, which starts October 1st of this year, actually began back in the spring of 2023. Federal agencies start planning their budgets 18 months in advance. So in other words, right now, they're planning for the fiscal year 2026 budget, if you can imagine that. Right around September of last year, that's when the agencies sent their requests, what they need, over to the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, for review. Okay, so this begins a conversation between, say, USDA and the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. OMB takes a look and they say, okay, I know you want this stuff, USDA. I know it's important, but the president, he already has a top line number, and we need to put a lot more money into these other programs that have to do with his cancer moonshot than agriculture right now. So I'm really sorry, but you're going to have to make some really tough choices and push these numbers down. So this conversation goes back and forth between the agencies and OMB, October, November, December. And then when all those conversations are done, that's when, around March, April, well, really should have been like February, March of the following year, that's when the president wraps this budget request up with a bow and sends it over to Congress. So that's what happened in March of this year, 2024. The president put together a federal budget request for 2025, sent that to Congress, and then Congress would start its process for fiscal year 2025. All of this is to say that, that's when that happens. That's when it happens, when the president sends over the budget in that little block of nothingness. So all of this is to say, if you were to see the president's budget come out in like this last February, March, and you were like, oh my gosh, USDA is like, this number is totally wrong. How could you eliminate this program? What is going on here? And you go to USDA and talk to them, it's not going to do you any good. Because USDA, they literally finished that process a year earlier. You could talk to them about fiscal year 26 stuff now, but it's no good to tell them about what's in the president's budget request. That ship has already sailed. Instead, right now, this would be a good time to go talk to Congress. You could say, hey, I know the federal budget request had all this stuff canceled, but what we really need is XYZ. And that's an appropriate time to say that. Or you could say, hey, did you see what the president's budget requested? USDA could really use this money, and so could we. So, you could talk about it in those terms to Congress. But when you go is really important. If you were to go in the fall, if you came to DC in the fall, you might go and talk to OMB and say, hey, for that 2026 budget, here's what we're thinking. So the timing is really important. All right, so questions about appropriations? Anything? Nothing yet. Okay. All right. So now we'll get into that DC state of play. What's happening right now? All right. So first of all, this is the Everything Everywhere All at Once week. Congress just passed fiscal year 2024 spending bills. This was 6 months late. I don't know if you noticed. So back last September, they were supposed to pass all these bills. They didn't. They punted. Fortunately, they did continuing resolutions instead of just letting the government shut down, although it got real close. My husband works at USDA and we had like a long conversation. Are we going to be able to go to the Smithsonian this weekend or not? The whole town shuts down, but the whole government shuts down too when they can't pass anything. Fortunately, they passed a continuing resolution, and they kept passing these resolutions until they managed to pass their budget. So 6 months into the year, we have a budget for the full year. This is very challenging for agencies, as many of you know, because now they suddenly have this money and they have to spend it all in half the amount of time they would ordinarily spend it. So it's not great for business, right, to do it this way. But fortunately, they did it. And now they are working on the fiscal year 2025 bills. Traditionally, Congress isn't very good at passing appropriations bills on time in an election year. And it is an election year, a big one. So we will see what ends up happening. They're holding hearings now. They bring in secretaries and representatives from different departments and agencies to talk about what they need. You have this in the president's budget request. Why do you need this? And it's a conversation that's, of course, worth having. And we'll see what Congress ends up doing with fiscal year 2025. At the same time, we need a farm bill. The farm bill that we're in right now actually expired last September at the end of the fiscal year. And just like they did with a continuing resolution for the budget, they passed a kind of a continuing resolution for the Farm Bill, an extension. So they have this extension that goes for a full year, which is fine, but there are a lot of programs that really do need an update. And there are a lot of ways that policy could be fixed or influenced or course corrected along the way that, we in the APLU-BAA have been very invested in. So we've been waiting to see what the House and the Senate want to do. Just this Wednesday, like 2 days ago, the House, which is controlled by Republicans right now, released a Republican-geared framework of their version of the Farm Bill. It was a little short on details, but they have a markup scheduled for May 23rd, which means that by May 23rd or earlier, we're going to see the whole complete text of what they put together. Short version here is that the Republicans in crafting this bill have done their utmost to make it very difficult for Democrats to vote against it. They put in a lot of priorities that Democrats and Republicans love. And so this was their opening salvo, their first attempt at negotiating. And we'll see what happens. Democrats are upset about one certain SNAP provision that I'm not going to get into the details about unless you really want me to. But needless to say, they're not actually that far apart, these two groups. And so it's actually looking really promising. Meanwhile, very unexpectedly, at least to me, the Senate released its own framework. So the Senate Agriculture Committee is chaired by the Democrat from Michigan, Debbie Stabenow, and she released a framework that had surprisingly a lot more details than the House version. It was like section by section what they want to put in the Farm Bill. And very encouragingly, the ranking member, Senator Bozeman, issued a statement saying, thanks so much to my colleague, Senator Stabenow, for getting this conversation going. I can't wait to negotiate further and to compromise and come to a bipartisan bill in the end. So I'm not going to say that it's great likelihood that a farm bill still will pass, at least not before the election, and maybe not in this calendar year. But it's some really great movement, and I'm really looking forward to digging in and seeing what the actual text looks like. Because the more that we see, and if our priorities are in there, even if there's a new farm bill that has to be made in the next Congress after the election next year, no one wants to reinvent the wheel too much. And so a lot of that text, especially the bipartisan priorities, may stay. And then the last thing that's happening is, well, what about other stuff? Supplementals, they're called supplemental spending bills. So the House and the Senate both recently passed emergency international aid funding. This is things like for Ukraine, for Israel, for Taiwan. And so that's a lot of money that just, also went out the door in addition to the normal appropriations process. A lot of people are talking about how this year's appropriations process for fiscal year 25 is going to be possibly even harder than 24, which was 6 months late. How is this going to work? Are we just going to get a continuing resolution? Well, sometimes it's really hard and you have to make very drastic cuts. And you may see bills with, scary cuts, but I would advise you all to not panic, that realistically, based on the caps that were set in the Fiscal Responsibility Act by President Biden and former Speaker McCarthy, they have to abide by these caps. But there are also these supplemental funding bills that often come around when there really is a dire need for extra money. And another one could be, for example, for infrastructure. Perhaps you heard right around the corner in Baltimore, a giant ship ran into a bridge and it totally collapsed. And so there may be a federal spending bill that has to do with rebuilding that bridge. And maybe it would have some other priorities tacked in along the way. So this was like a one big everything that's happening in DC at this moment slide. So before I move on to advocacy, are there any questions about this, what's happening right now?
Yeah, and I would encourage anyone that has a question to speak up. One quick question, Elizabeth. Is there a link that actually has the details? I know the House side is pretty lean, but I thought the Senate side had a lot of interesting components to it. And along with that, one of the components of the Senate version has reinstating the authority for the 4-H name and emblem On that particular issue, that's a non-financial issue, obviously. Do you see there being any opposition as far as that moving forward? That's pretty important to all the states out there, all the universities that have 4-H programs and controlling that name and emblem moving forward.
Yeah, no, that's something that we were told about, Lewis-Burke was told about when we first came on board with APLU BAA as a big priority, a big Farm Bill priority, and we've been tracking that from the beginning. And that's been part of our advocacy message from the beginning. So in our conversations with the House and Senate Agriculture Committee staff, the people who actually write the bills, put pen to paper, so to speak, that's been something that they've agreed to from the beginning. So we weren't surprised that that was in there. And, obviously we'll wait to see what the final text says, but both on the House and the Senate side, I expect that that will be, what we've been asking for, because that's what the staffers have told us is not going to be a problem.
I guess another question, the president released his budget.
Right.
Is that for FY25?
Yes.
And there were some significant cuts in that budget. How concerned should we be about that budget?
Well, I should say always take the president's budget with a grain of salt, because it is never taken very seriously on the Hill. And if you have questions about specific programs, then, it depends on the program. So I'll give you an example, a couple of USDA examples. I was a little disheartened to see that the president's budget did not have a request for AGARDA. AGARDA is an advanced research projects agency that was authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill and has never really gotten any appropriations at all, right? So it was supposed to be a high risk, high reward agency in the mold of DARPA or ARPA-E for agriculture. And, sometimes the president's budget has requested funding for it, and this time they just completely ignored it. And they probably ignored it because, well, for a variety of reasons, but because, if there are these caps that President Biden had to stick to because he made this agreement with Speaker McCarthy, then he can't put however much money he wants in. And so protecting programs that are already in existence, as opposed to putting money towards programs that actually haven't been stood up yet, is something, that makes sense in the grand scheme of things. And yet no mention at all is an indication that they don't really care about that program. So that was a disappointment to me. That being said, there are other programs that they cut, that they don't include, and that it would seem like, the president's, the administration doesn't care about it, but are actually kind of gimmicks to get the number lower because they know Congress will fund these programs anyway. So, and I'm oversimplifying a bit, because like I said, it really does depend on the program. But if you have a specific program in mind that you're like, oh, I can't believe they cut this out, talk to me afterwards. I'm happy to take a look at it and see whether this was like one of those kind of gimmicky things, or whether it's like, oh no, we should really have a conversation with USDA about that.
No, that's really helpful. And I think so. The question then becomes, we had a major appropriation to ARS that was not in the budget, that is pass-through money for extension.
Yep.
And so now our question is, do we mobilize with Tammy Baldwin, make sure we get that in front of her, or it's not taken that seriously, do we not worry about it?
I would talk to your government relations person at Wisconsin, to Ben, and make sure that your senators, that your Congress, that Pocan, Baldwin, that they're aware, and because that never hurts. In this case, though, I think I'm going to go with my statement about kind of the gimmicky parts of it. USDA, there are a lot of sort of earmark-like funds that go through Congress that USDA has to put into its budget from last year, because they came through. The money went into the budget for USDA, and USDA was just told very specifically how to spend it through like an earmark. when they look at the budget for next year, they don't include any of that. If it's going to come direct from Congress, they will eliminate that because they can't guarantee, first of all, that senators or Congress people will put that specific funding in, or what even the Congress people, will want to put in, because they're not kind of privy to those conversations in terms of the community directed spending or earmarks. So they'll just eliminate all of that. And it's as if they suddenly have, $100 million more to play with in other places, and they will put that money in other places around their budget request to show what their priorities are. Not that their priority isn't, the pass-through for extension, but it's unless they have another place to put that money, it won't end up in the budget. I know this is getting very technical, but yes, the short answer is I wouldn't worry about it, but I would make sure that your legislators, that your delegation is aware that this is still really important to you.
Okay, yeah, that's very helpful. Any questions? Folks can just chime up. We don't have a large group today. Anyone has any questions, speak up now.
All right. You can also hold your powder dry or whatever it is, and then we can talk about it at the end, because I still have, about 10 more slides or so. Oh, hey, Rich.
So going back to Carl's question, we see that tactic about cutting something and you waiting for somebody to reply that it's really important. But then we're talking about the president's budget and not the House or the Senate. So we still, even though maybe that was intentional to get that feedback, it's probably still appropriate to wait for House or Senate budgets to come out and look for those same items there, or to act prior to those House or Senate budgets coming out.
Oh, you want to act prior. Absolutely. You want to be in on the ground floor. You come in, that's why we do carrot in like March, right? You come in and say, hey, I know you just started thinking about this. Here are our priorities.
But to your point, that action should not be going back to USDA. It should be going forward towards Congress, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Good, thank you.
And again, like, you can talk to me about the individual program. In the case of Carl's program, I'm willing to bet that's not originally a program that was asked for by USDA, but was probably asked for by Congress. And in which case you go to Congress with that request. But if this is a program that USDA has implemented and they have gotten rid of it in their own president's budget request, like, that's a different story. And that would be a good thing to go to Congress about. I mean, sorry, to USDA about.
Right. I think one of the things that might be on people's minds, there have been these small cuts that happened just recently that we've seen within NIFA. But the thing that caught everybody's attention was, for example, the IPM centers going from 100 million to 3 million. That was kind of the big thing. Everybody said, "Oh my God, look at that!" So that's pretty much what I'm asking about.
Yeah, in that case, you can both. That would be like a both and. So I would say go to Congress and talk to them about the importance of the centers, but also, if you wanted to, go to USDA and say, why was this downgraded? What should we be doing here to rise up the level of importance on your list? And what is missing from this that it wouldn't be fully funded in the budget request?
That brings, hi, this is Jorge Atiles from West Virginia
Hi.
University. So the rural development centers, it's not the first time that they get zeroed out in one of these things. And it is concerning because many of us fully utilize the rural development centers, and they play an important role for bringing faculty and other ideas and resources together. And typically they're put back.
Every time.
Every time. So is there anything that you think we ought to be saying about that right now, or do we leave that alone?
I would say, through BAA, through your institution, making sure to go to your delegation saying, just reiterating how important these centers are is absolutely on the table, something that you can do, should do. This is one of those cases, again, though, where I'm not sure how useful it is to go to USDA. This could be just like a convenient place for them to cut because they know that Congress loves these and will put them back.
So something else that I have brought up with this group and others before, and I started actually telling our staffers in our last 2 visits, when you get other agencies coming to also advocate for their resources, ask the question, how are you partnering with Extension? I mean, simply, are your RFAs including, Extension as an eligible, applicant? We need to continue to diversify the way in which you could access money. And these other agencies seem to be more successful in getting the money. Well, it's time for them to share it because we can do a lot in partnership with them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I agree. Speaking of advocacy, should I move on? Yep. All right. So I'm going to be talking about a very sort of narrow sliver of how to do advocacy, specifically with respect to Congress. But as Jorge was just demonstrating, like, it doesn't have to be. I hope that you will take the message and the lessons from today's talk and use them, in agency conversations as well, in conversations with, anyone that you want to partner with. But just for the sake of argument for today, the examples that I have are congressional ones. How to craft a memorable message. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you want to figure out which story is best for your ask based on your audience. And what do I mean by your ask? Okay, so Jorge's example was, put extension in your funding announcements, right? Like, that's an ask, absolutely. If you go into a congressional office, it's honestly, it is not worth your or anyone else's time to set up a meeting and not request something. Maybe you might think that you're just like educating someone, and maybe you think you're building a relationship, and maybe you are doing those things. But if you leave a congressional office without having made a specific request, I can guarantee that nothing you'll have said will have really stuck with them, because there's nothing for these staffers to latch on to do. So these offices, they're in the business of customer service. They want to hear from their constituents, and most of all, they want to solve your problems. They can help you with so many things. They can solve policy issues from random personal stuff like issues with your passport or tickets to visit the White House. They do this. They call that casework. So you need to give them a problem that they can fix or an action they can take. Even if the action is, you should come and see our facility, you should come to campus. That could be the ask that you're going in with. But for this example, let's say that our ask is funding for agriculture research infrastructure, right? Who knows where I got that request from, right? It's a challenge we've heard a little something about. So let's say that that's your ask. Next, you have to think about, well, who is your audience? If you request a meeting with your representative or your senator, it's less likely that you'll meet with a member directly, and more likely you'll meet with a staffer. So who are these people? This is actually a good outcome. The staffers are smart, they are motivated, and very poorly paid, which means that that they really believe in what they're doing. And you can sometimes look up, for example, like on LinkedIn or in the internet, what the staffer cares about, but most staffers worth their salt. They know and care about what their members care about. So for example, I used to work in a congressional office for Louise Slaughter in upstate New York, in Rochester. And she was the chair of the Rules Committee. And she cared a lot about, she'd been pushing a lot of legislation about food safety, about antibiotic resistance. But what you might not know is that she got her start by in public policy by running for office to protect an old growth forest in her neighborhood from being developed. She actually lost that campaign, but she continued to run for a public office, and eventually became one of the most powerful people in the House of Representatives. And this this story was on her website. Everyone in the office knew this story. So if you came into the office as a, whoever you were, and said, hey, I know that the representative really cares about conservation and old growth forests, you immediately had our attention because you establish trust, right? That is the first thing that you can do. You establish trust. So you might have a terrific story that illustrates exactly why, for example, funding for agriculture research facilities is essential. But you can't assume that your priority is the same as the congressperson's or the staffers. So if you want to connect with that staffer, first, like, I need to start with something that I know that office cares about. And this establishes trust because, like, it shows that I understand their boss and what they represent. So first you establish that trust. Then you present a challenge. It's like a hook, but there's a problem. And then you make them the hero. Okay, so you don't ever want to say, I can fix this problem. You want to say, and you can help us fix this problem. I know it sounds silly, but it's the truth. Like, nothing works better than stroking an ego sometimes, right? So these are the steps for really solid advocacy. I mean, not the only way to do it, obviously, but I find it one of the easiest ways. So how do you do this? How do you actually go about figuring out what your story is going to be? How do you establish that trust? The first thing you want to do is actually go to their website. So I have an example. Here is a freshman congressperson from Indiana. She's one of the newest members of Congress. I find that, like, if you have a senator who's been there forever and everyone knows them, you think you know what they're for. And like I said with Louise Slaughter, most people thought they knew what she cared about, but there were other things that she cared about that you might not necessarily know. But at least you have something to go on because they've been around for 20 years. But if you have a brand new member of Congress, the best thing you could do is just start by going to their website. So here's one of the newest members of Congress. So I'm just going to ask you all to take a look and write in the chat. If you just went to this homepage of, this brand new member of Congress because, I don't know, you're in her district, what do you think she cares about? Trying to see if I can pull up the chat because I can't see it right now, but maybe Carol can tell me if any answers pop in. Can you all read it? I'm just making sure it's not too small.
Yeah, so there's lots of people chiming in with small businesses, Elizabeth, and economic development.
That's right. Yay. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, small business is like one of the things on her right there on her home screen that you could talk about. So all of the Congress people and senators have a similar kind of homepage, and they all have this like about tab, right? And so if you go to these about tabs, you can find their bios, like read what they say. Their about Tom or meet Aaron pages can tell you a lot about what this office cares about and what they pay attention to. Sometimes they're also like issues or legislation pages, which can tell you what they think or what they've done more specifically. So this information is actually really important because talking about issues that they care about is a way to validate and value what they think. If you include their perspective, you're gonna build that trust. So trust can't be built just from sharing facts, unfortunately. So okay, so now that we know who we're talking to, and I can tell you, I'm gonna save you, but like if you actually went to her about page, it would talk about how she's a small business owner. Okay, so that's a big part of her identity. So okay, let's build this story. All right. I might go in and say, hey, we know the Congresswoman is interested in supporting small businesses and that she's a savvy businesswoman herself. A lot of Indiana farmers know farming but need help when it comes to the business of running a farm. So we're adding something a little bit about ourselves now. Purdue Extension has partnered with the Agribusiness Initiative to provide extension educators to assist. It's one-on-one, it's confidential, and it's free. In fact, this program helps entrepreneurs from all kinds of small businesses, not just in agriculture. So You're saying, this is what the Congresswoman cares about? Guess what? We care about it too. I see you. We do the same thing. You can trust us because, like, look, we care about the same priorities here. But you need this problem. What's the problem? Purdue would love to expand this program to reach even more small businesses across the state all year round, but we do not have the facilities, the infrastructure to host meetings in the places with the greatest need. That's the problem. And now the solution. If you supported $5 billion in funding for ag research facilities in the Farm Bill, we could expand our footprint and bring these resources to everyone, facilitating homegrown businesses across the state. So there's an example. I'm going to give you one more in like the last minute that I have. So John Fetterman's a senator from Pennsylvania. I'm going to save you the trouble, even though just because we're running out of time, who he is. Yeah, he cares about rural America. And if you went to his like About John tab, this is what you'd see. It says he's a Pennsylvania native. He grew up in York and attended Albright College. He's dedicated his life to fighting for Pennsylvania's forgotten communities that have been left behind. He taught GED classes. He was encouraged by his students to run for mayor. He worked to rebuild his community, created jobs, stopping gun violence, getting youth engaged, bringing creative urban policy solutions to Braddock. So just from looking at his homepage and reading like the first half of his bio, I get this guy cares about youth. He cares about forgotten communities. I can work with that. So here's what I would, if I were coming from, say, Penn State, here's what I would say if I went to his office. I would say, I know the senator is interested in youth engagement and giving opportunities to underserved communities. Let me tell you about a Penn State extension program that gives experiential learning opportunities to a collection of high schools in economically depressed areas that take students to campus to do real agriculture research. This program has decreased absenteeism, increased test scores, and now more students from these schools are attending college. But, because you need the but, many of these students are not even going into agriculture majors because our ag research and classroom facilities are dilapidated and out of date. If you support $5 billion in funding for ag research facilities in the Farm Bill, we can show these students the value of science that supports agriculture, natural resources, bio-based products, and the rural economy. They can take that education to rebuild their communities. Okay, so what we talked about, I got my summary slide, talked about authorizations, talked about appropriations, talked about DC state of play and advocacy, and now we've got like 1 minute for discussion and questions. I'm sorry, that was, we only have a minute. I'm so sorry.
Elizabeth, this is Jorge again. I just wanted to say thank you. This is quite helpful because you have actually put words that we could use into action there and a good step by step on how to go about it. It's not so different from when we're working with donors, in development.
Right.
I mean,
it's not so different.
We find out what they care about. We give them an opportunity to see what they could do if they could only, help us. So thank you.
You're so welcome. I see a question from Jason. How do we find that hook? Yeah, absolutely. BAA should help you with that. But their websites really tell you a lot of what you need to know. They really do.
But if we wanted to get more details, like if we really wanted to, an influential representative or senator, is that something Lewis-Burke could help us with? Like,
yeah, I would also
getting under
say,
the hood a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're having trouble, I would say if you contact your own, like absolutely you can work with us. But you can, all of you also have GR people in your own universities. And they have, we have a much 10,000 foot level here. They have very good relationships with their delegation. So if you go in and say, hey, what's Mark Cocan, what does he care about? They will know off the top of their head without even having to go to the website. I mean, you can do that. You can go to the website. You can go to your GR people at your university and say, all right, now we know what they care about. How does it connect to, what you do? Like that extension example that I gave it for Purdue, I gave it for a Purdue Carrot meeting. And I was like, I just got to warn you all, full disclosure, I am making this up based on what I know about this random House member that I've never met and what I found from your extension website. So I make no guarantees that this is accurate. And they came up to me afterwards and said, that's exactly what we do. Can we take a picture of this slide? And can we use this? And I was like, yes, use it. So, I mean, if I can get that from like 2 websites. You know, I'm sure like we can work together and, you know, get whatever you need to get.
Well, great. So I think we're out of time, but thank you very much, Elizabeth. Also, thanks, Rich, Jorge, and Jason for the questions today. And I will turn it back over to Damona and Sandy. But thanks, Elizabeth. Very helpful. Great session.
Sure thing.
Yes,
Thank you.
I'll just echo that. So yeah, some helpful reminders and overview, as well as some very specific lessons that I think we can all learn from there. So thank you for that. So we'll close with just a reminder of the next date, June 7th. So it will not only include some Cooperative Extension System updates, but also some updates from our NTA team on artificial intelligence and how we're applying it through work that's being done from that partnership. So no meeting in July. We've got summer meetings for the extension for the ECOP delegation. But if you will, take a second to scan the QR code so that you can complete the survey. So again, thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks to the Professional Development Committee for their work in scheduling this. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you again soon.